"You're paying, right?" My father said it smiling, one hand already curled around a $400 bottle of wine he'd ordered before I'd even pulled out my chair. The lobster was steaming. The wagyu bled a soft pink across 16 white plates. 3 years of silence, one handwritten letter begging me to come make amends, and this was the amends, a long table of relatives who wouldn't meet my eyes, and a bill they had already built for me to carry. I set my purse on my lap, smiled back at him, and lifted 2 fingers to call the waiter over. Because there was one thing my father had spent 29 years refusing to learn about me, and he was about to learn it in front of everyone he'd invited to watch me fold. My name is Iris. And if you've ever sat at a table full of people who share your blood and realized not one of them was actually on your side, then you already know the particular temperature of that moment. It isn't hot. People think rage is hot. It isn't. It's cold and it's clear, and it's very, very quiet. It feels like the inside of a walk-in freezer at 4 in the morning, which happens to be a place I know well because for the last 18 months, I've opened a bakery 6 days a week with my own 2 hands, and I've learned that the coldest rooms are where the most careful work gets done. Let me back up, though, because you deserve the whole thing, not just the ending. And I promise you, there is an ending. There's a reason the waiter nodded when I whispered to him. There's a reason that 15 minutes later my father's smile came off his face like paint off a wall. But you have to understand who I was to them first, because that's the part that took me the longest to understand myself. I grew up in a small house on Delco Street with a mother named Sandra who loved a clean floor more than she loved a calm child, a father named Raymond who believed the world owed him something it had somehow forgotten to pay, and an older brother named Dylan who was, from the day I could form memories, the son the entire household orbited. Dylan is 4 years older than me. He is 33 now. When we were kids, if there was one slice of cake left, it was Dylan's. If there was one good coat, it went on Dylan's back, and I got the one with the broken zipper. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you'll understand that the arithmetic of that house was set before I could read. In our family, love was a finite resource, and it had been allocated a long time ago, and I was not on the list of recipients. I was on the list of contributors. The one person who ever looked at me and saw something worth watering was my grandmother, Vivian. My father's mother. She lived 20 minutes away in a narrow blue house that always smelled like butter and cardamom. And from the time I was 7, she'd pull a step stool up to her counter and say, "Come here, little thumb, I'll teach you something they can't take." And she taught me to bake. Not the easy things, the hard things. Laminated dough you have to keep cold or it weeps. Custards that split if you look at them wrong. She taught me that patience is not waiting. Patience is doing the small correct thing over and over, while everyone around you loses their nerve. She also taught me to keep a ledger. A real one, a green cloth-covered notebook, because Vivian had watched her own husband gamble away a house, and she said to me once, so quietly I almost missed it, "A woman who knows her own numbers cannot be lied to about her own life." I was 25 when she died. 4 years ago, pancreatic, fast, cruel, gone in 11 weeks. And when she went, the last soft place in my family went with her, and what was left underneath was the machine. The machine that ran on me. Here is what the machine looked like, in numbers, because Vivian taught me that numbers are where the truth hides when everyone's busy performing. I started working at 16. First a coffee counter, then a catering kitchen, then 2 jobs at once, days prepping in a restaurant, nights doing the books for a laundromat, because I was the only person in my family who liked math, and it turned out math liked me back. From the time I was 18, I sent my parents money. It started as help. Just until your father's hours pick back up, Iris. $220 a month, folded into an envelope or dropped into their account, from the year I turned 21 until the year I turned 26. 5 years, $13,200 if you're keeping the same ledger I was. But the monthly money was just the hum underneath. On top of it were the emergencies, and in my family, the emergencies were always Dylan-shaped. Dylan needed $2,400 for a car so he could get to a job he quit after 6 weeks. Dylan needed $1,900 for business supplies for a reselling scheme that evaporated. Dylan, Dylan, Dylan. And every time, my mother would call with that particular tremble in her voice, the one she could summon like a stage actress hitting her mark, and she would say, "You're the responsible one, Iris. You're the only one we can count on." And I heard love in that sentence for years. It took me an embarrassingly long time to hear what it actually was. It was a job description. By the time I was 26, I had one thing that was mine and mine alone: $18,000. I had saved it in a separate account, dollar by dollar, tip by tip, over the better part of 6 years, and it had a name in my head, and the name was Vivian's. Because I was going to open a bakery. Not a dream, not a someday, a plan. I'd found a lease. I'd priced the ovens. $18,000 was the down payment on the rest of my life, and it was the only thing I had ever refused to hand over. You already know I didn't get to keep it. Let me tell you exactly how they took it, because the how is the whole story. It was 3 years ago in March. Dylan had gotten himself into something real that time, not a scheme, an actual debt, the kind with actual men who wanted actual money by an actual date. And my parents did the thing they always did, which was to treat Dylan's fire as a bill that had my name on it. My mother called. The tremble was there, but underneath it was something new, something flat and decided, and she said, "We need $18,000, Iris. We know you have it, we're your family." I said no. For the first time in my adult life, I said no out loud to my mother, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit down on my own kitchen floor. And here is the part I still can't fully forgive, even now, even after everything I'm about to tell you. They didn't accept the no, they went around it. My name was still on my parents' bank account, a leftover from when I was 19, and they'd added me to help manage things, and I had never taken myself off because who removes themselves from their own mother's account? What kind of daughter does that? But my savings had been in a separate account at the same bank, and my mother, it turned out, had spent a decade watching me be trusting, and she knew exactly how to walk into a branch with a sympathetic face and a story about a family emergency and move money between linked accounts that both technically still had my name attached. I found out when I went to transfer the down payment, and the account read $311. I called my mother. I was crying so hard I could barely form words, and do you know what she said to me? She said, and I will remember this until the day I die, "Oh, don't be dramatic, it's family money. You'll get it back eventually. Your brother needed it more than your little cupcake project. Your little cupcake project." That was the sentence. That was the exact moment the temperature in me dropped and never fully came back up. I didn't scream, I didn't threaten. I did something that frightened them far more, though they didn't understand it yet. I went quiet. I hung up the phone, and I opened the green cloth notebook Vivian had left me, and I wrote down the date and the amount and one single line underneath it, "No more." And then I disappeared, 3 years of no contact. No calls, no holidays, no birthdays, no explanations. I blocked their numbers. I moved apartments. I changed banks, and I changed the locks on every part of my life they'd had a key to. And people in my family told the story. I later learned that Iris had gone cold, that Iris had abandoned her parents, that Iris had always thought she was better than us. That's the version they told at family barbecues while eating food I would once have paid for. The ungrateful daughter, the cold one. But here's what they didn't say, because saying it would have required looking at themselves. In those 3 years, I built the thing they laughed at, my little cupcake project. I clawed the $18,000 back the hard way, a small business loan I qualified for on my own credit, which was spotless, because unlike everyone at that dinner table, I had never once missed a payment on anything in my life. I opened Vivian's 18 months ago, on a corner that used to be a dry cleaner, and it is not a cupcake shop. It is a bakery that has a line out the door on Saturdays, that caters weddings, that got written up in the city magazine under the headline, "The best croissant you haven't found yet." I did that. Alone, in the cold, at 4 in the morning, while my family told strangers I'd abandoned them. So when the letter came, I knew. I want you to understand that I knew before I even opened it. The letter arrived in June, this June on nice paper, in my mother's careful handwriting, which she only ever used when she wanted something. And it said all the right things. It said we've had time to think. It said we were wrong. It said your grandmother would have wanted us to be a family again. She used Vivian. She reached into the grave and used the one person who ever loved me as a lever, and I sat at my own kitchen table and I laughed, and then I stopped laughing because I realized I was going to go. Not because I believed it. I want to be very clear with you, because I think this is the part that matters most for anyone listening who has ever been where I was. I did not go because I was fooled. I went because I had decided, somewhere in those 3 cold years, that I would not spend my whole life running from people who were, in the end, so much smaller than the shadow they'd cast over my childhood. I would face them once, on my terms, with my eyes open, and then I would be free of them not because I'd hidden, but because I'd looked. There's a difference. Hiding is still a leash. I wanted the leash off. But, and Vivian would have been proud of this, I did not go blind. Before I answered that letter, I made a phone call. And that's where I have to introduce you to the one person in this whole story who was actually fully, no questions asked, on my side. Her name is Priya. We met 4 years ago in the worst possible circumstance. She was catering coordinator for the venue where my grandmother's small memorial reception was held, and she found me crying in a storage room among stacks of folding chairs, and instead of leaving me there, she sat down on the floor next to me in her nice work clothes and didn't say a single stupid, comforting thing. She just stayed. We've been best friends ever since. And in the intervening years, Priya finished the law degree she'd been chipping away at for a decade. And she now practices family and financial law, which means that my best friend in the entire world is, conveniently, exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when your family comes back around smelling money. I called Priya the night the letter arrived. I read it to her over the phone, all of it in my mother's Sirapandarsnik voice, and when I finished there was a long silence, and then Priya said, in the flat clinical tone she uses when she's already 3 moves ahead, "Iris, listen to me. People who genuinely want to make amends don't ambush you. They apologize small, and they ask for nothing. If this dinner has more than 4 people at it, it isn't dinner. It's a collection call." I told her I already knew that. I told her I was going to go anyway. And Priya, because she has known me for 4 years and knows I cannot be talked out of a decision, once my jaw sets, did not argue. Instead, she said the sentence that started everything. She said, "Fine. Then you don't walk in there without knowing exactly what they're planning, and you don't walk in there without me, having already made sure they can't touch a dollar of yours ever again. Come to my office Thursday, bring the notebook," so I did. Now, I want to slow down here, because the next part is where a lot of people would have gotten it wrong, and getting it right is the whole reason I'm sitting here able to tell you this like a woman who won instead of a woman who got burned again. The first thing Priya did was not dramatic. It was boring, and boring is where safety lives. She walked me through freezing my credit at all 3 bureaus, a hard freeze, the kind that means no one can open a line of credit in my name without a PIN that lives in my head and nowhere else. Because, she said, tapping her pen against the desk, if your family is escalating and a fake reconciliation dinner is an escalation, then somebody has probably already thought about your name as an asset. Let's take it off the table before they reach for it. I remember thinking she was being paranoid. I remember thinking they wouldn't. And I want you to remember that I thought that, because in about 4 days I was going to find out exactly how wrong I was, and it's going to matter. The second thing Priya did was pull every scrap of documentation I had about the $18,000. The account statements from 3 years ago, showing the transfer out. The text messages, because my mother, God bless her arrogance, had actually texted me things like, "We moved the funds, it's handled," in the days after, thinking a text was as safe as a whisper. Priya read them and her eyebrows went up slowly and she said, "Iris, do you understand that this is documented, unauthorized removal of funds from an account in your name with a writ admission? Do you understand what you've been sitting on?" I told her I hadn't wanted to sue my own parents. I'd wanted to walk away clean. "You still can walk away," she said. "But there's a difference between walking away because you're afraid and walking away because you've decided the price of them isn't worth collecting. Right now, you'd be doing the first one. I'm going to make sure that when you walk out of that restaurant, it's the second one. Deal, deal." That word again, it kept coming up that week, deal. Like Vivian used to say when we'd finished a batch of dough and covered it and put it in the cold to rest. Now we let it be, little thumb. The deal is made, the work is done. We just wait for it to rise. I answered my mother's letter with 4 sentences. I said I would come. I said I'd meet them at a restaurant of their choosing on the 2nd Saturday of August at 7:00. I said I would come alone. And I said, because I wanted to hear what they'd say, just the 3 of us then. "You, Dad, and me," my mother wrote back within a day. And her answer is the thread I want you to hold on to, because it's the first place the whole thing unraveled if you were listening the way I'd been trained to listen. She wrote, "Of course, sweetheart, just family, just family. Not just the 3 of us, just family." She'd let the phrase do the lying for her, and I clocked it, and I called Priya and read it to her. And Priya said one word. 16, you don't know it's 16, I said. I know it's not 3, she said. Where's something you can walk out of comfortably? Here is the part where I have to tell you how I really knew in advance, not just suspected, what was waiting for me. Because I want you to understand that, when I walked into that restaurant and saw the long table and the lobster and the wine, I was not surprised. I had heard it out of their own mouths 4 days before. It happened because of my cousin Bethany. Bethany is 26. She's Dylan's age mate on the cousin side, and she is not cruel, she's just weak, which in my family is nearly the same thing, but leaves a door open. Bethany came into Vivian's the Tuesday before the dinner. Walked right into my bakery, which she'd apparently found through the magazine article, and stood at my own counter with her mouth open, because I don't think a single one of them had actually believed the bakery was real. She looked at the line, and the cases full of laminated pastry, and the little brass V on the wall that I'd had made in Vivian's memory, and she said, "Iris, this is yours." And then, because Bethany cannot hold water, she got flustered and she started talking, and in about 90 seconds she told me everything, thinking she was making small talk. She told me the dinner was going to be at Marchetti's, the most expensive place in the city. She told me everyone was coming, her parents, our aunt and uncle, Dylan and his girlfriend, the whole spread. And then she said the thing. She lowered her voice like she was doing me a kindness, and she said, I want you to know. Uncle Ray said you'd want to. He said now that you've got money," she gestured at the bakery, "it's your turn to put the family back together. Dylan's got that situation with the money he owes. It's really bad this time, and your dad said nice dinner, everyone together. You'll see how much we all miss you, and you'll want to help. He said you were always soft like that underneath. Soft like that underneath." I smiled at Bethany. I gave her a box of pastries on the house. And after she left, I stood in my own shop, the one I'd built out of the ashes of what they took. And I felt the freezer cold settle into me one final time, complete and clean. Because now I knew the whole shape of it. The dinner wasn't reconciliation, it was a stage. 16 witnesses, deliberately assembled, so that when they cornered me about Dylan's debt, the pressure of every relative's eyes would do the work my mother's tremble used to do. They weren't inviting me to a meal. They were inviting me to a performance in which I'd been precast as the wallet, and the ovation would be me picking up a check for a debt that wasn't mine in front of an audience, unable to say no because saying no in front of everyone would make me cold all over again. They had planned everything, except me. They'd planned a version of me that died 3 years ago on a kitchen floor next to a phone. And I let them keep planning for her, because Vivian taught me the most important thing about waiting, which is this: you never correct someone who is confidently walking toward the edge of a cliff. You let them arrive. I have to stop here for just one breath, because we're about to walk into that restaurant together. And I don't want you to miss a second of it. If you felt this cold in your own life, if someone who was supposed to love you ever looked at you and saw a wallet with a heartbeat, then stay with me through what happens next, because this is the part I held onto for 3 years, and I need you to be in the room when it lands. Come sit at the table with me. If this story has found the tender place it's looking for, tap that subscribe button and be here for the rest, because what comes next is the reason I can tell any of this at all. Now let me take you inside. The Thursday before, in Priya's office, we'd built the actual plan, and it was so much simpler then. You'd think. That's the thing nobody tells you about winning. It's rarely elaborate. It's usually just refusing to play the part you were assigned, one small correct move at a time, the way you fold cold butter into dough. Priya's plan had 3 pieces, and only 3. Piece 1, the credit freeze, already done, so that no matter what happened at that table, no one could reach into my future and open anything in my name. Piece 2, documentation. Priya drafted a single letter, 1 page, professional, on her firm's letterhead. It laid out, in dry, unemotional language, the $18,000 removed from my account 3 years ago without authorization, referenced the text message admissions, and stated that any further contact requesting funds or any attempt to represent me as financially responsible for another family member's debts would be met with a formal demand for repayment of the documented sum, plus interest, and that all communication going forward should route through her office. She printed 2 copies, sealed them in 2 envelopes. I put them in my purse. You may never use these, she said. That's fine. A door doesn't have to be walked through to be a door. It just has to be there, so you know you can leave. And piece 3 was the one I'd added myself, the night before, lying awake, and it was the smallest, and it was the one that made everything land. I called Marchetti's. I asked to speak to the manager. I'd worked in enough restaurants to know exactly how to phrase it, and I'll tell you what I said when we get there, because the timing is the point. Saturday came. I dressed carefully, not to impress them but to feel like myself, a deep green dress, Vivian's, little gold thumb-shaped charm on a chain, flat shoes I could walk a mile in if I wanted to. I drove to Marchetti's. I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes, and I did the thing Vivian taught me, which is to breathe until your hands are steady, because steady hands, little thumb, is the only revenge worth having. Then I went in. The hostess led me toward the back, and I heard them before I saw them. Laughter. My family's laughter, that particular loud, confident sound of people who believe the evening is already going their way. And then the private room opened up, and there it was, exactly as Priya had predicted, exactly as Bethany had spilled. A long table, 16 people. Let me tell you who was there, because it matters that you see the whole stage. My father, Raymond, at the head, of course, holding court. My mother, Sandra, to his right in a blouse I recognized as new. Dylan, my brother, 33 years old, and still with the loose, easy grin of a man who has never once paid for a thing he broke, and beside him a girlfriend I'd never met who looked, I'll be honest, faintly embarrassed to be there. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Pete. My cousin Bethany, who would not look at me and who I understood in that moment had probably been told to keep her mouth shut and had failed, and I loved her a little for failing. Various other cousins and their partners, an elderly great uncle, the whole assembled jury. And the table, oh the table, they hadn't waited for me. That was the message, and it was a deliberate one. The lobster had already been ordered, and had already arrived great red split shells, steaming on a platter in the center. 16 portions of wagyu, that impossible marbled beef, resting pink on white plates. And in front of my father, uncorked, breathing, a bottle of wine I clocked the label on immediately. Because I buy wine for a living now, and it was a $420 bottle of Barolo. They had ordered the single most expensive meal that room could produce, and they had ordered it before I arrived, so that the bill would already be a living thing by the time I sat down, so that there'd be no gentle menu conversation, no "oh let's not, that's too much," just a fait accompli, a number already growing in the kitchen, with my name assumed on it. My father saw me and stood, arms wide, that showman's warmth. "Iris, there she is. Everybody, look who finally came home." And there was a ripple of "hello, hi Iris, we've missed you," from people who had not thought about me, except as a resource in 3 years. I said hello. I sat down in the one empty chair, at the foot of the table, directly opposite my father at its head. A throne and a stool, and they'd left me the stool. That was fine. Vivian used to say the person who controls a room is almost never the one at the head of the table. It's the one who's paying attention. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand, and her eyes were wet already. She could cry on cue. I'd forgotten how impressive it was. Genuinely, the woman should have had a career, and she said, "Sweetheart, we are just so glad. We've all wanted this for so long. To be a family again." And around the table people nodded and murmured, and it was a beautiful performance, and I looked at all of them, and I felt the strangest thing. Not anger, sadness almost. Because for one flickering second, I let myself imagine that it could be true, that these people could actually just want me, and I felt the old hope try to lift its head, and then my father opened his mouth and killed it for me, cleanly, which I'll always be grateful for. He picked up the $400 bottle, tilted it toward my glass, and he said it. The line. The one you already heard. He smiled the biggest, warmest smile of the entire night, and he said, "You're paying, right?" And the table went quiet, not shocked quiet, waiting quiet. Every one of them had known this was coming. They just hadn't known he'd say it so early, so baldly. Before I'd even had water. Bethany stared at her plate. Dylan's girlfriend went very still. And I understood in that silence that this was the whole thing, laid bare, that they'd assembled. 16 people not to welcome me, but to witness me, to make the pressure of all those eyes so heavy. That I couldn't possibly say no, that I'd pay the $4,000 dinner tonight and Dylan's debt by Friday, because that's who I was to them. The one they could count on, the responsible one, soft like that underneath. I looked at my father. I looked at him for a long moment, long enough that his smile started to work a little harder. And then I did the only thing that mattered. I raised my hand calmly, and I caught the eye of our waiter, a young man with a careful, professional face whose name tag reads Sebastian, and I gestured him over. My father's smile widened. He thought I was calling for my own glass, calling to accept the bottle, calling to take my place as the family bank. My mother's hand tightened on mine in anticipation. Sebastian bent down to my level. And I said 2 sentences to him, very quietly, so quietly that not one person at that table could hear the words, only see my lips move. I said, "Please bring 16 separate checks, one per guest for exactly what each person ordered. And please confirm with your manager that the reservation is not secured by any card of mine." Because I never provided one. And then, because I'd made that phone call the night before and I wanted to be certain he'll remember I spoke with him yesterday. Sebastian's eyes flicked just once to my father at the head of the table, and then back to me. And he nodded, one small, professional, absolutely lethal nod. And he straightened up and walked away, and my father, who had watched the whole silent exchange, sat back in his chair looking deeply satisfied, because he had no idea, none, that the ground had just quietly opened up beneath the entire table. "There she is," he said again to the room, warm as anything. "Always takes care of her family." I smiled. I let him have it. I even lifted my water glass, the water I'd asked Sebastian for and nothing else, and I touched it lightly to the rim of my mother's wine, and I said, "To family." And then we waited. And I want to tell you, those 15 minutes were the most peaceful 15 minutes of my entire adult life. Because here's what I hadn't told them, what the phone call the night before had been about. When I'd called Marchetti's manager, a patient man named Gio, I had explained the situation with complete honesty. I told him my family had made a reservation under my name and intended for me to be surprised with the bill. I told him I would not be paying for the table, and I asked him for exactly 2 things. 1, that no card of mine be attached to the reservation as a guarantee, no matter what anyone at the table claimed. And 2, that when I gave the signal to my server, each guest be presented with a separate check for their own order. Gio, who I suspect had seen a great many families in a great many configurations, had been quiet for a moment, and then he'd said, with real warmth, "Miss, I have been doing this for 22 years. It would be my genuine pleasure. Restaurant people know, they always know." So while my family ate their lobster and their wagyu and refilled their glasses from the $400 bottle, laughing, relaxing, some of them shooting me satisfied little glances, Dylan actually raising his glass toward me at one point with a smug, "Good to have you back, sis." While all of that happened, in the kitchen and at the register, 16 individual checks were being carefully prepared. And I sat at the foot of the table with my water, and I felt Vivian beside me, and I waited for the dough to rise. They tried, in those 15 minutes, to begin the real business. My father started it, dabbing his mouth, leaning back. "So, Iris, we heard about your little bakery. Real proud of you, sweetheart, real proud." A pause. "You know, family helps family. And your brother's in a tight spot right now. Nothing he can't handle, but you know how it is. We thought, all of us together, we could figure out a way to." And I let him get exactly that far. Because I wanted him to have started, on the record in front of everyone, so that no one could later say I'd walked in cold and cruel. I wanted 16 witnesses to the fact that the very first substantive thing my father did, after 3 years and a letter about Vivian, was ask me for money for Dylan. And then Sebastian came back. He came back with 2 other servers, and they moved down the table in that graceful, practiced restaurant way, and they began, quietly, setting a small black folder in front of each and every guest. One in front of Aunt Carol, one in front of Uncle Pete, one in front of Bethany, one in front of Dylan, one in front of Dylan's girlfriend, one in front of my mother, one in front of my father. 16 little black folders, blooming down the white tablecloth like the world's most elegant frost. My father looked at the folder in front of him. He looked at the ones going down the table. His smile flickered, the first real flicker of the night. "No, no," he said with a little laugh, waving Sebastian over. "There's a mistake. It's all one check, it's all together. My daughter's got it." And he gestured at me, grandly, the way you gesture at a valet. Sebastian, calm as still water, said, "I'm sorry, sir. The party was set up for separate checks. Each guest's order is on their own bill." And then, because Gio had briefed him perfectly, he added the sentence that took the paint off the wall. "And there's no card on file for the table. The young lady confirmed she'll be covering only her own order, a sparkling water." He inclined his head toward me, professional and immaculate. "Which she's welcome to, with our compliments this evening." Silence, real silence this time. The kind with a floor dropping out of it, every head turned toward me. 16 faces, and I watched the exact moment the truth reached each of them, rolling down the table. Like a wave. My father's face went from confusion to something darker. My mother's hand, still near mine, went cold and pulled back. Dylan sat forward. And I looked back at all of them, steady, my hands perfectly still, Vivian's little gold thumb warm against my collarbone, and I did not raise my voice, not once, not for the entire rest of the night. I want you to know that I never raised my voice. "Iris," my father said, and the warmth was gone now, replaced by the tone I'd grown up under, low and hard, the "you are embarrassing me" tone. "What is this?" "It's dinner," I said. "You ordered it, you'll enjoy it. And you'll each pay for exactly what you chose. That seems fair, doesn't it?" "Paying for what you chose. This is a family occasion," my mother started, that tremble arriving. "Right on cue, and you're humiliating us in front of—" "No," I said. Just that, quietly. And it landed like a plate dropped in a quiet kitchen, because I don't think I had ever, in 29 years, said the word no to my mother and simply left it there, unbuttressed. Unapologized for. No, I'm not humiliating anyone. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't said one unkind thing. I ordered a water, and I asked to pay for what's mine. If that humiliates you, then you should think very hard about what you assumed was mine to pay for. And why? My father stood up. 61 years old, and he stood up at the head of the table like he could still make a room shrink. The way he used to make our little house on Delco Street shrink. "After everything we've done for you," he began, and I almost laughed because that sentence, that exact sentence, is the family crest. It's engraved over the door of every house like the one I grew up in. "After everything we've done for you, you come here and you pull a stunt like this. You've got money now, you've got your little shop, and you can't even." "Sit down, Dad," I said, gently, almost kindly. "I have some things to say, and then I'm going to leave, and you're never going to have to be embarrassed by me again. But you should sit down and hear them, because they're the last things I'm ever going to say to you." And Vivian raised me not to waste words, and something in the way I said her name, Vivian, my grandmother, his mother, made him sit. Slowly. Because they'd used her to get me here, and now I was going to use her to end it, and on some animal level he understood that the ground had shifted, and he no longer knew where the walls were. I opened my purse. I took out the 2 envelopes Priya had prepared, and I set them on the table in front of me. Unopened, where everyone could see them. I did not need to open them. Priya was right, a door doesn't have to be walked through. It just has to be there. 3 years ago, I said to the whole table, in the calm, even voice I used to walk a nervous new hire through a recipe, my mother went into a bank and moved $18,000 out of my savings account into my brother's hands without my permission, because our names were still linked. From when I was 19. $18,000 I had saved, alone, tip by tip, over 6 years. It was the down payment on my bakery. She called it, and I'm quoting her exactly because I wrote it down that night, family money. She called my life's work my little cupcake project, and when I cried, she told me not to be dramatic. I looked at my mother, she had gone very white. "I have the bank records," I said. "I have your text messages, Mom. We moved the funds, it's handled. You wrote that to me." "My lawyer has it all." I touched the envelopes. "These are for you, both of you. They explain very politely that if anyone in this family ever again asks me for money or tells anyone that I'm responsible for Dylan's debts or represents me financially in any way, that $18,000 becomes a formal demand, with interest. I have never wanted to take you to court, I still don't. But I want you to understand that I could, and that I have chosen, so far, not to. That choice is mine, not yours, it was never yours." The table was frozen. And then, as I knew it would, it broke, and I want to tell you how it broke, because the way people break tells you everything about who they actually are underneath the performance. Dylan broke first, and he broke the way I expected, outward loud, a bully finding out the smaller kid grew up. He shoved back his chair. "This is insane. This is, you're really going to do this, over money. I'm your brother, Iris. I'm in real trouble here, and you're sitting there with your fancy lawyer envelopes playing the victim. You've always been like this, cold. Grandma's little favorite, so much better than the rest of us." "Yes," I said, and it stopped him. Cold, because he'd expected me to flinch. "I was Grandma's favorite. Do you know why? It wasn't luck, Dylan. It's because when I was 7 I showed up at her house, and I helped and I listened, and I paid attention, and you never once did, because there was nothing in it for you." She saw both of us clearly. She loved me because I was lovable to her, and she was wary of you because you were exactly what you are right now, a grown man who thinks his sister's savings account is an emergency fund with legs. That's not cold, that's just accurate. I'm sorry you're in trouble, I truly am. But I paid for your trouble for 11 years, and I'm retired. And then my mother broke, and she broke the other way, inward, collapsing, and I'll be honest with you, this was the part that nearly got me because for one moment the performance dropped, and what was underneath looked almost real. She put her face in her hands, and she said, through what may or may not have been genuine tears, I never meant, Iris, you don't understand, your father and I, we were drowning, Dylan was, I did what I thought I had to do for this family. And here's the thing I've learned, the thing I want to give you if you take nothing else from my whole long story. You can have compassion for someone's drowning and still refuse to let them use you as a flotation device. Both things can be true. I reached across and I put my hand on my mother's arm, and I meant it. There was real tenderness in it, and I said softly, I know you were scared, Mom. I believe that, but you didn't reach for a life raft. You reached for your daughter, and you pushed her under so the rest of you could float, and then you told everyone she swam away. And I've decided I'd rather be a daughter who swam away than a raft that drowned. That's not cruelty, that's survival. Vivian taught me the difference. The rest of the table sorted itself, the way rooms do. Aunt Carol had her hand over her mouth, and I saw in her eyes that she'd known, that they'd all known some version of it, and had come anyway, for the free lobster and the show. Uncle Pete was already, quietly, opening his own little black folder and looking at the number with the face of a man doing math he didn't like. Bethany, my leaky cousin, was crying, and when she caught my eye she mouthed, I'm sorry, and I gave her a small nod, because she was the one who'd warned me, even by accident, and I don't forget a kindness, even a clumsy one. Dylan's girlfriend had quietly picked up her purse and was looking at the door. My father made one last attempt, he always would. He leaned forward, and he lowered his voice to the intimate register, the one he thought made him persuasive, and he said, Iris, sweetheart, think about what you're doing. You walk out of here tonight, that's it. You'll have no family. Is a bakery worth having no family? And I stood up. I gathered my purse. I left the 2 envelopes on the table because they were his to keep now. And I looked down at my father, at the head of his table, surrounded by the wreckage of a dinner he'd ordered on someone else's assumed dime, and I gave him the truest answer I had. I haven't had a family in a long time, Dad, I said. I just had a bill I hadn't stopped paying. You didn't invite a daughter to dinner tonight. You invited a wallet, and you were disappointed to find a woman in the chair instead. That's not my failure, it's yours. And the saddest part is that the daughter was here the whole time, underneath the wallet. You just never once thought she was worth the price of her own meal. And then I did the thing I'd waited 3 years and driven across a whole city to do. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, the only thing at that entire lavish table that was actually mine, and I drank the last of it, and I set the empty glass down gently, and I said, too. The whole room, in a voice as warm and even as if I were thanking them for coming to my shop. Thank you all for coming. The lobster's very good. I'd get the checks while it's still warm. And I walked out, I didn't hurry. Vivian taught me that too, you never run from a room you've won. I walked past Sebastian, who was standing near the door with an expression that was carefully blank, but whose eyes, when they met mine, held something that looked a great deal like respect, and I slipped him folded cash for a tip on a water I'd been given for free, because you always take care of the people who take care of you, and I said, thank you truly. And he said, anytime, miss, and I think he meant it. I got in my car, and I did not cry, which surprised me. I'd thought I would. Instead, I sat there in the Marchetti's parking lot for the second time that night, and I called Priya, and when she picked up I said, it's done. And she said, are you okay? And I realized, testing it like you'd press on a bruise, that I was. That the cold had finally lifted all the way, for the first time since I was 26 years old on a kitchen floor. Because you cannot be exploited by people you have fully, completely, and permanently stopped needing anything from. Not their money, not their approval. Not even their love, once you understand that what they were offering was never love, but a lease. With you as the collateral. I'm okay, I told her. I think I'm actually okay. Then come over, she said. I made the dough this afternoon. I've been letting it rise. I thought we could bake something. I want to tell you what happened after, because life doesn't end. At the reveal, it just gets quieter and truer. They paid their own checks, all of them. I heard about it later, in pieces, mostly from Bethany, who called me a week afterward, still sheepish, and told me the whole room had sat there in stunned silence, and then, one by one, opened their little black folders and paid for their own lobster and their own wagyu, and that my father had argued with the manager, Gio, for 10 full minutes and gotten absolutely nowhere, because Gio had done this for 22 years and was not going to be moved by a loud man at a nice table. Dylan, apparently, couldn't cover his own bill and Aunt Carol had to put it on her card, and I'd be lying if I told you there wasn't a small clean pleasure in that particular detail, the brother whose debts I'd carried for a decade, unable to pay for a single dinner. I never heard from my parents again, in the way they wanted me to. My mother sent one more letter, 2 months later, and this one didn't mention Vivian and didn't ask for money. It was just angry, 3 pages of angry, about what I'd done to the family's name, and I read the first paragraph, and then I did something Vivian would have loved. I didn't throw it away in a rage, I filed it in a folder with the bank records and the text messages and the copy of Priya's letter. Because a woman who knows her own numbers cannot be lied to about her own life, and I keep my ledger complete. Bethany and I are, slowly, becoming something like real cousins. She comes to the bakery. She's the only one of them I let in, and I let her in a little at a time, with my eyes open because forgiveness and trust are 2 different accounts, and I fund them separately now. And the bakery, Vivian's, is thriving. We're opening a second location in the spring. I hired 4 people this year, and I pay them well, and I pay them on time always because I know exactly what it does to a person to be someone's unpaid emergency fund, and I will never, ever do that to anyone who works for me. On the wall by the register, there's the little brass V, and underneath it, where most people don't notice, there's a small framed card in my own handwriting, and it says the thing my grandmother told me on a step stool when I was 7 years old. A woman who knows her own numbers cannot be lied to about her own life. I think about that dinner sometimes, at 4 in the morning, in the good cold of my own kitchen. Laminating dough the way she taught me, keeping the butter cold, doing the small correct thing over and over while the city sleeps. And I don't feel triumphant, exactly. I feel something better than triumphant. I feel like the walls are where I put them now. I feel like the head of my own table. I feel, for the first time in my whole life, expensive, not in money, but in the way I mean it. Which is that I finally understand I was never the cheap thing at that table. I was the most valuable thing in the room, and they'd priced me at a lobster dinner, and I got up. And I took myself off the market. So that's my story, friend, that's the whole thing. And if you're still with me here at the end, I have a feeling it's because some part of it found some part of you because you've sat at a table like that, or you're afraid you will, or you're sitting near one, right now, trying to find the nerve to order a glass of water and mean it. If that's you, I want you to hear the only lesson I've got, the one that cost me $18,000 and 3 years of silence to learn. You are allowed to love people and still refuse to be their raft. You are allowed to be warm and still be closed. And the moment you stop needing anything from the people who have been feeding on you, you will discover that the cold you've been carrying was never yours. It was theirs, and you can just set it down. I'd truly love to know where in the world my voice found you tonight, whether you're washing dishes in a kitchen somewhere, or lying in the dark with your headphones in, or driving a long road home. Tell me your city, tell me your country, tell me what time it is where you are right now as you listen to me say this. Let's meet down in the comments. I read them, and there's something quietly wonderful about a whole Scattered map of us, strangers who understand each other, gathered around one story after dark. And if this one reached you, if Iris felt real, if you want to sit with me again next time, I've got a story to tell. Stay with me. Subscribe, and I'll keep the light on and the coffee warm, and I'll have another one ready for you. Until then, keep your own numbers, keep your dignity, and order the water if you need to. I'll be right here,